Chapter 5:21. Missed the important part. Amy headed to the basement to at least try to clean up Dominic's mess and see what he had forgotten to collect from the bodies. However, she had questions. He had vanished through the portal nearly 12 hours ago. But there was only one house here, and the staff had just realized that he had arrived. The timeline didn't add up for a feral dragon let loose. Even if he had been in a heated battle with the mages here, it would have attracted attention within minutes of his arrival. 12 hours was ridiculous. So, where did he go before he was here, and how did he get here? Or, was he knocked out when he arrived, and then escaped from confinement? That was an option, and would explain the delay. If they were trying to hold him for ransom, the battle wouldn't have started right away, and the mages might have been blocking their attempts to find him. That was a slightly horrifying thought, because it meant that there was likely someone else aware of where Dominic was right now, and they were likely to try to use that information as leverage to extort the princess. Getting Dominic back before he became a martyr, a sign of the Dago's rebellion's continued presence, would be imperative if they were thought to be missing. Fortunately, the Duskblade sect mages knew where they were. If anyone did attempt to claim he was missing or killed, they would confirm it with her before taking any drastic actions. Amy opened the basement door and gagged at the sight in front of her. That was absolutely disgusting. She steeled her nerves and checked the bodies. They had been mostly looted, but Dominic had only taken their storage items. He hadn't checked the bodies for their affiliation tokens, which were normally spelled to forbid putting them in a separate space. He also hadn't taken their spell gems, weapons, or anything else. Only the storage items. He really was terrible at the whole collecting evidence to build a case and prove the truth in front of a royal court portion of being a duke. If the whole point was just to point at the bodies and tell people what you wanted, it would be much easier, but without evidence, the nobles would believe what they wanted, no matter what the court said. Fortunately, there was plenty of evidence, and she quickly determined that all of the bodies had come from the last hour or less, as the blood was still wet and the bodies warm. With that done, she searched the rest of the basement. The floodwaters were getting dangerously close to the windows, after which the room would surely flood, no matter what spell was keeping it dry for now. On one side was the main stairwell to the main floor, but the door was locked from the inside, with a drop bar holding it closed. Dominic had clearly not exited by the door. He must have gone up the same one she entered from, in the servants' passages near the kitchen. But there was also an open door, torn off its hinges and tossed into the next room. That was a bit more promising as an egress path, but not for his sanity at the time. Amy stepped inside, and a vicious growl rasped from her throat. There were dozens of children in cages, all of them in horrible condition, but all alive. "Little one, who did this to you?" she whispered to one of the boys. His mouth moved, but Amy quickly realized that someone had ruined his throat, likely with a hot poker to burn his vocal cords from the inside. "It's all right, I will get you all out of here first, and then we can get answers. Did you see a dragonkin man with gold horns?" The kids all nodded and began to wail softly as they gestured to a cage with its front wall torn away, and then to the door, which had claw holes in the backside, where it had been forcibly torn from its hinges. From inside the cell. Just how strong was Dominic when he went feral? And why didn't they take away anything that he could have used to either break out or go feral when they locked him up? "Can any of you speak?" Amy asked quietly as she worked to cut the locks on all the cages with magic. A girl in the corner whispered back, "I can speak. Are you the dragon's friend?" "His best friend. He is upstairs now. The nobles and the mages are dead. Only the servants are left." The girl nodded slowly, trying to understand what was going on. The dragon man was unconscious when they threw him in here. They were really excited, like they had just won something. They started to call someone, saying that they had captured him, but then his eyes opened, and he grew claws and just tore his way out. He tore the door down and killed everyone. They cast spells on him, but he just kept fighting. The girl went silent, in shock from the horrors that she had seen, but Amy had one last question. How long was he in the cage? Barely long enough to close the door? Not more than a minute or two. It's challenging to tell time with no window in here. So he had been captured, but only an hour ago. Then what did he do for the other 11 hours of his disappearance? Where did he come from, And how did he get here? Getting answers somehow felt like they didn't actually answer any of her questions, while still giving her a clear picture of what happened. All right, the cages are open. Can everyone move? If you can, we will go back upstairs. The servants will help you all. The kids looked skeptical. The servants that come down here to help them are all evil too. They do cruel things to us. The girl whispered. Perhaps this manor wasn't going to have any survivors after all. Chapter 5:22. Radio broadcast. The children crawled out of their cages and tried not to look at the main room as they followed Amy upstairs. They crowded behind her as they saw the kitchen staff emptying the pantry, and Amy whispered to them, "Are these servants that you know?" There were no female servants in the cells or the basement. The girl whispered back, "Well, that at least eliminated most of the survivors from the future casualties. Tell me if you see one, and I will make him disappear." Dominic came down the stairs to see how the search was going, and frowned as he saw a large group of children with Amy and a very confused cook holding a 30-kilo sack of rice. "Aren't they a bit small to be helping with the cleanup?" Amy rolled her eyes. "You forgot to check the side rooms before you left, and they were in cages in the basement. I couldn't just leave them down there to drown as the waters come up." Good find. All right. Is there anything else that we're missing? Other than 11 hours of your timeline? Are you missing anything? Amy asked. Dominic double-checked his supplies. "I have my storage items. I'm missing one rifle, one of my pistols seems to be melted, I'm down to one shirt, my sword is cracked, and I'm out of mortars. Oh, the launcher tube is dented as well." "What did you do?" "Your guess is as good as mine. It sounds like I had a pretty good time, though. 11 hours and coming back out of artillery rounds? How could that be a bad day?" "That depends who you use them on now, doesn't it?" "Did you get in contact with Westover?" Dominic asked, changing the topic. "Not yet. The radio is upstairs, right?" Dominic nodded. "I assumed you would use magic of some sort." Amy shrugged. "I will do both, in case they try to pretend that you're dead and use that to pressure concessions out of the princess and Prince Alex." Before she went upstairs, she sent a message to Elder Manif, who responded with a simple confirmed. The radio room was on the top floor and looked entirely intact, with no signs of a battle which might have damaged the gear. That was a good sign, but she had to be sure that they hadn't sabotaged it before they left. There was a chance that the Dago's nobles had destroyed the gear so that the peasants that they left behind couldn't call for help. Sure enough, when she flipped the power switches, nothing happened. Amy sighed and slid under the desk to see what they had done. What she found was a tangled mass of unplugged wires, but no visible damage. So, it was up to her to guess where everything went, based on manufacturer labels and her basic knowledge of radio transmission systems. Operating and sabotaging communications were part of the Duskblade sect training for assassins, but she didn't have to use it all that often, as it was usually a kill mission if she was sent on it. After a few minutes of reorganization, the crackling sound of panicked nobles pleading for rescue as the floodwaters reached the highest points of their territory filled the room. There were prayers, desperate pleas for mercy, and angry denouncements of everyone who was seen to have caused this disaster. With a dozen messages going out at a time, even if she broadcast the message, nobody would be able to hear it. There was simply too much radio traffic. She sent the message anyhow. Duke of Westover recovered alive. Estate previously abandoned. She messaged, letting the simple words float out into the ether. Somehow, her message got through. Whether it was her calm tone or the power of her broadcast, it attracted the attention of many of the other broadcasters. "Where are you? Is it still dry there? Please." The storm surge flooded everything near the shore. "Are you on land? Please respond." Amy considered the options for a moment, then decided that killing off a few more of the Dago's nobles wasn't a terrible way to spend the day before the house flooded. It was still raining hard everywhere except immediately around the manor, and the waters should still be going up, even with the storm surge beginning to retreat and the runoff to the ocean as the ground was saturated. It didn't take much to flood the whole area when there wasn't anything more than 50 meters over sea level for hundreds of kilometers. "We are broadcasting from the manor outside Lightson. Aim for the middle of the clearing in the clouds, and you will find us." Dozens of responses came at the same time, and Amy smiled at her brilliant idea. If she had Dominic make more artillery, he could bomb them before they even close enough to disembark. Given that they had all evacuated in a panic, they were unlikely to be heavily armed. Of course, if the water got any deeper, the Navy would be an actual threat. The airships weren't a threat yet, but if the wind slowed, they could be. Any of them that tried to stay here had either been torn open or blown away by the storm. No matter how good an airship was, it was no match for winds hundreds of kilometers an hour. "Did you manage to get anything out over that noise?" Dominic asked as he entered the radio room. "Not much. I think that I managed to lure a few more nobles toward the manor, though." Dominic smiled. "I will get the mortars ready. I love it when we're all working from the same playlist. Don't forget that you can use the rifles from much further if you have one left." Dominic nodded. "It was an older rifle that went missing. I've still got my regular use one, and the new custom one I made when I did a Lexus personalized unit." "You really need to work on that. You're hard on equipment and you don't even know where it went missing." Dominic shrugged. "Not that it really matters if everything is flooded. I can claim it went missing anywhere. For all I know, it's in the basement somewhere." Chapter 5:23. Don't flood yet. While Dominic was preparing additional mortar rounds, the staff rushed to take care of the malnourished, injured, and traumatized children. They thought about chiding Dominic for not helping them, but after half a second of consideration, they realized that it was only likely to traumatize them further. Whatever had happened down in that basement, he was the cause of it. Having him close to them while they were still shaking with fear and hunger was only likely to make things worse. "I will make something quick. We've got Ken's soup still to be moved that only needs to be heated. We can feed them before going upstairs. We've got that much time for certain," the chef insisted. Dominic nodded. "There is plenty of time. The rain should be slowing, and the water level increase will slow with it." "Amy, do you have any ideas?" The little maid shrugged. "If we build earthworks to fill the gate, then along the outside of the wall, there is a Magitech pump in the yard we can use to clear the water. Then, we're good until it breaches the top of the walls." Dominic looked down the hill. That time was not far off. "Well, it might be too late for that. There is a lot of water between us and the wall. I don't know if there is a pump large enough to clear the water in under a week without the flood level going down. On the other hand, it will slow the influx. Might as well block the gate with magic and seal the wall. It will slow the rise inside the wall." Amy rushed out to go do the work, but left Dominic with a hand signal. "There are pedos among the men. Don't let them near the kids." Dominic nodded and sat down to relax in the kitchen with the kids, who were huddled in the corner. "Let's get you all seated for dinner. Ladies, can someone get a fresh cloth? Clean hands and faces for mealtime." Dominic insisted. The bit of normalcy, the same warning every child's mother had given them from time immemorial, was enough to help everyone focus on something other than the panicked need to move everything valuable to the upper floors. "Of course, Lord Dominic. Ladies, you heard him. Get the guests ready for dinner." They used the water sparingly, just wetting cloths to wipe down small faces and hands. They were still conscious of the hard times to come, with everything around them flooded. But keeping some sense of normalcy and routine was all that they could do, given the situation. Dominic felt an increase in mana use outside, and moved to the window to see Amy using a spell to move huge amounts of water out of the manor compound. That was not something that you could do with a Magitech pump. At least not one that was reasonably sized for anything short of a hydroelectric dam. But it was doing a wonderful job of moving the water back outside the walls, now that she had them sealed. The pump would need to be set up and run eventually. No wall was truly waterproof, as far as Dominic knew. But just having relatively dry ground inside the wall would be enough to keep the appearance of a safe space. "Your Grace, mind coming to give me a hand? If we extend this outer wall another meter upward, I think that it will be enough to weather the last of the storm and rains," she called as she saw him standing near the window. Dominic waved to the kids as he left, and then realized that he had forgotten one critically important question of Amy when she arrived. "How are the Daves doing? They had fire-resistant spells and their armor, but that spell was nasty, from what I remember." Amy shook her head sadly. They're mountain trolls, so they're not truly dead, as far as I know. But even with the spells, they still took severe burn damage, and their armor melted. Ingrid is taking care of them, but she says that it will be up to a year before they have fully recovered from the fire damage, even with the healers and mages helping. Well, a year is still something. I'm glad that they survived. I wasn't sure that they had managed it, even with all their defenses. We were all shocked as well. Mountain trolls are seriously tough. As they talked, Dominic examined her work and saw that Amy had created a thin layer of smooth stone over the outside of the wall to seal it against water ingress, while creating a mountain of rubble in the gate to fill it. That would work perfectly for what they had planned, and Dominic got right to work extending the wall a meter upward with fieldstone wall, then smoothing the surface with transmutation to turn it into one piece of stone. It was not pretty, and it blocked the crenellations on the wall, so it would certainly be taken down again after the flood. But it would hold the water out. Step by step, the pair made their way around the manor, reinforcing the walls and increasing the height so that the floodwaters were no longer lapping at the top of their security barrier. It didn't take long before they were standing behind a solid wall of stone, with only a small pond of water behind them and the manor grounds mostly visible, including the small boat, which had been the nobles' intended way out. There were a surprisingly high number of bodies in the yard, Dominic noticed. Most of them appeared to be servants of the manor and farmers, and almost all had sword wounds. Most likely, the nobles had killed the first round of commoners who tried to take the boat and flee, before Dominic turned the tables on them and the surviving staff finished the job. At least it was quick. Better than sitting on a roof watching the water get higher by the second until you were swept away. Chapter 5:24. Abandoned Paperwork. While Dominic and Amy were preparing the manor to wait out the day while Alexis calmed down, things were getting more hectic by the second in Westover Manor. Highness, we have word of an entire army coming our way. They have assembled at the southern edge of the flooding near Kynwyn, and they appear to be following the main road straight for Limsbury. First reports say that it might be a group of survivors, but the airships report that the force is nearly half uniformed Dago soldiers, and there are suspiciously few children with them. Julio reported as Alexis sat at her desk, looking at a mountain of paperwork. This is distinctly not my problem. Bring it to my brother. Or better yet, find Dominic, and bring it to him. Julio gave her a sympathetic smile. Highness, your brother is currently recovering from mana exhaustion, and after Miss Amy passed through the portal looking for Lord Dominic, we have been unable to get another portal opened in the area. There is a severe magical fluctuation in the region, though we did intercept their radio report. Both are alive and appear to be luring survivors to their location. Is he trying to save civilians, or just kill everything that moves? That is unclear. However, reports are that the entire region is flooded after the storm drove a 30-meter wall of water inland and then proceeded to dump nearly 3 meters of rain on them in under 3 days. Julio explained, reading from his notes. But he still found a dry spot and presumably captured it if Amy is sending radio messages from their high-powered equipment. How did you know that it was Miss Amy? Do you think that Dominic would have come up with that plan on his own? He is many things, including fearsome in combat. But if he didn't send a message in the first 12 hours, he completely forgot that anyone was looking for him. She didn't sound as mad about that as Julio had expected, but that could be largely because of her anger at the paperwork that had built up. They had been receiving constant airships, which the infrastructure team were building new warehouses for in the most efficient way possible. It was all very slipshod, in his estimation, and there were no roads or any utilities such as plumbing being run to them. But they were solid and dry, and that was the only part that anyone seemed to care about at the moment. Once the event was over, they could decide what to do with all those buildings and how to build the industrial section of the budding new city. Perhaps they would get lucky and find someone who wanted to turn them into productive factories, instead of having them mostly sit empty waiting to be surge crop storage. Is there anything that we can do to get Dominic back here to take care of a share of the work? Alexis asked after a moment of silent contemplation. Not at the moment. However, the second prince should be up soon, and I can refer all the military and security matters to him as representative of the crown. Julio offered. Wonderful, do that. But don't bring them to his room. or he will pretend to be asleep.
Julio laughed.
I am well aware of the most common tricks, Highness. Don't worry, I am doing as much as I can to offload the work, but much of this simply needs review and signature from a noble. There is no legal way around it. Alexis knew that she could just sign off on things without reading them and trust her staff to have it all right. However, that was not only highly risky, it also tended to breed corruption. Not a good precedent to set. In the sleeping quarters, Ingrid was tending to the two heavily injured Daves. Trolls could not recover properly from fire damage, so the healing process from a major fire attack was both brutal and extreme. What she had to do was bring in healers, then cut away a portion of the burnt flesh to let Dave recover the affected section. Then, he would need time to heal and regain strength before he could regenerate a new part. The damage to the torso and head were both minimal, thanks to the thick helmets and protection of their shields. However, they were too injured to just cut away entire limbs and let them regenerate from nothing. So, they had started with the face and torso, which would let his vital organs heal first. Then, once that was done, they could increase the cuts. Dave's healing would keep the burnt flesh from festering, but as it was fire damage, the natural healing was slow, and left alone, it really would take the full year that they had quoted. It wasn't uncommon for heavily injured trolls to go into virtual hibernation after a wound like this, with their clan coming daily to feed them. But Dave was determined to get back to work. So, they were accelerating the process, with the goal of getting him back to work before the second full moon. That was fast enough to keep Dave happy, and realistic for what their healers could do. Unaware of any of what was happening at home, Dominic sat on top of the newly built wall and watched the horizon. There were boats coming their way. Nothing large enough to be called a ship, but steam-powered riverboats, and what he suspected was a magically propelled sailboat, given how well it was tracking upwind. Their calls had been received, and now they were getting their first victims.
Guests.
Definitely guests. Unless they were really Dago's nobles who had sided with Prince Kaizan. In which case, he would simply sink the vessels in the floodwater and watch them be washed away. Amy, are you ready for the fun part? Always. You really should cover your horns before they get close enough to see us, or the whole bit will be ruined. It's just a shame that we don't have one more loyal person who can send out a jamming signal to prevent them from warning others what is about to happen to them. Chapter 525. Selective Outrage. Dominic pulled his hood up over his horns and prepared to greet the incoming vessels. The floodwaters weren't moving fast, but the current was still exceptionally strong, to the point that they would have to dock on the down current side, or possibly along one of the sides with extra restraints to keep their vessel from being dragged under by the turbulence. The first ship came up along the side wall, steam paddles working furiously to hold it in place alongside the wall as the occupants rushed to the shore. Boss, I think that ship is full of dock workers and hookers. Amy noted quietly. Then bring them in. What's the worst that could happen with a bunch of commoners in a stolen boat? Amy laughed a little as she caught the lines and used magic to anchor them to the wall, as there were no cleats on the structure they had made.
Come on in.
For now, it's safe enough to remain here. Dominic called over to the ship. Who is in charge here? The dockman who had thrown the line asked cautiously. The Duke of Westover. The man took a second to think about the answer, trying to remember who that was. Then it came to him, and he almost dropped the line. So, there are no Dago's nobles left alive in that manor? Not a single one. My apologies if you wanted some. The man smiled and waved for someone to come forward. 3 men brought a large ramp, the one that they used to load cargo and passengers. That let the occupants disembark 2 at a time, while the experienced men ran extra lines to keep the boat from breaking free in the current. With that one vessel tied off, more began turning their way. It was a good sign that there were either supplies to be looted in the house or safety to be found, and they would take either at this point. What is your plan to survive this disaster, Lord Westover? One of the men asked in a heavy accent that didn't sound like Dago's to Dominic. Well, you see, there is a small issue. I have a long-standing grudge against the Dago's nobility and royal family. I was planning to use artillery to sink their emergency escape vessels and then opening a portal to go home once the water dropped too far for them to approach. The civilians standing nearby stared at him in shock, and even Amy had to admire the absolute balls it took to say that to someone's face, not knowing their loyalty or identity. Well, that's one way to do it. I suppose I'm not in a position to complain at this point. Half this crew is from the slums or the pirate docks, and we're near too out of coal to keep the steam chambers running. If you didn't have your lady friend call when she did, we would have been washed out to sea. How far is it to the sea from here? The man laughed, as with so much water, it truly wasn't clear where the ocean started and the flood ended. About 10 kilometers? The ocean is on the outskirts of the city, to the west. It's built a bit inland to get away from the worst of the storm damage, but I guess that doesn't matter when the storm is large enough. Another vessel was coming closer, and they hoisted what was most definitely the royal family flag of the Dagos Empire. However, that was no longer in use. The new king had chosen to change it when he took over, as he was from a branch family. So, the only one who would possibly use that was a loyalist to Prince Kaizan. I recommend that you go down and away from the wall. Dominic informed the last of the survivors to depart the steamship. They rushed down the wall, unwilling to risk the wrath of someone who would claim to be the Duke of Westover. Even if he was a fraud, he was a madman. "What's your plan?" Amy asked. Dominic smiled as he attached a small rope to a mortar shell. Insidious. Dominic lit the fuse on his horn and hurled the mortar, letting the thin line trail behind it, as if trying to send a rescue line to the vessel. As expected, the man at the helm caught what he thought was a mooring line weight right before the mortar exploded and took out the controls of the sailing vessel, leaving the line slack in the water. Not bad. They're going down fast, and they've lost controls. I wonder if they'll fall for it twice. Amy shook her head. The current is pushing them away from the manor, so if they don't have a mage on board with wind magic, there is no way they'll get close enough. Dominic shrugged. Well, I can try it on the next one. Assuming they don't send a radio message warning them. We should have brought a portable radio out here, so we could hear what's going on. Amy tapped her ear and pointed at the house, where the window to the radio room on the upper floor was open. You can hear that? She nodded. Not human, remember? I'm surprised you can't. Dominic shrugged. There's a lot going on. I can hear the children crying, but not the radio. Amy nodded. She was actually using magic to focus on the radio over all the other noise, but she could hear it without the help, though it was challenging to understand anything in the jumble of noise. They didn't get a message out. I think that the explosion took out their radio because they're still struggling to get the damaged lines retied. They're not going to be a threat with no rudder left. They'll make it to the ocean, then get pushed southwest down the coastline by the wind and current. Now, they just had to wait for another vessel to get close enough. Chapter 5:26 Dark Skies. Dominic's opinion that the clear weather would get them some free nobles to eliminate was looking quite prophetic after another half hour, as more vessels began to approach. But then the clear skies started to darken, and the winds picked up to a level that was going to tear the anchored paddle ship free of the wall. Dominic, start working on more wall. The wind is going to push waves up over what we have, and then we're at risk for a breach. Add to the whole wall, from the base up, so we don't end up with a weak spot. Not enough time for that. How about we just reinforce what's on top of the old wall?
Do it.
Double the thickness and add another 2 meters. That should keep most of the water out. Lightning began to crackle, lighting up the increasingly dim skies, while the clouds began to give off an eerie green glow. Well, that's new. Dominic muttered as he worked his way around the estate from the upwind side first. I wish I could say the same. Those clouds mark tornadoes anywhere that I've ever seen them. Amy shouted. Wait, that's not magic? I would have totally taken a giant-scale magical effect over tornadoes. Amy laughed at his sour tone as she worked in the opposite direction. They needed all the extra wall that they could get, and they were likely to see waves topping multiple meters over this new addition. Gentlemen, if any of you wish to remain on board your vessel, I can almost guarantee that it is going to break free. The clouds are showing rotation already, and it's large. I'm guessing it will be a multiple kilometer wide tornado, or multiple smaller ones. With that sort of wave, I don't know how well your vessel is going to fare. Amy called. The men conferred for a moment, then shrugged. As long as it doesn't knock the wall in, we're fine. Being on board isn't any safer than being in here if we get a tornado hit. But tied off as it is, if it doesn't get sucked up, the bumpers should keep the damage minimal. The boats are usually tied alongside the seawall for major storms. The storm overhead was getting worse by the second, and while it wasn't raining on them, the wind was whipping water off the surface and scouring their faces. Everyone inside, latch the storm shutters and seal everything. We will keep the house as intact as possible with magic. Dominic instructed. The staff was already started on shuttering everything that had been open for ventilation, and the house had good thick wooden storm shutters, so Dominic had some hope that it would survive relatively intact. When the storm got too bad, he would put an area barrier over everything. At the level he'd gotten his spell book to, it would hold against most natural winds, as long as it didn't hurl too many large objects at them. But he didn't have to make it completely solid, just strong enough to mute the wind to a manageable level. The storm clouds were spreading, and the last thing Dominic saw before he stepped inside was the entire sky lit up with purple lightning. Man, that sky is angry. Looks like you all made it here, just in time. The locals will tell you what they need. We're just guests in their home, until the storm is over. Ladies, we reinforce the walls, and the pump is running to keep the water saturating the ground from flooding the yard. You might as well make a soup or something for everyone. I apologize for the additional mouths to feed, but we couldn't send away such lively refugees. The cook huffed in annoyance, but she grabbed a pair of women in scandalously short dresses and dragged them into the kitchen to help her. They had moved nearly everything upstairs, but they weren't going to be able to store some of the fresh goods if the Magitech freezer went out, so she would cook with that first. If they made it through intact, they had a good meal to start out the wait. If the basement flooded, then they lost a little less food. Dominic waited as the ladies made dinner, and the new arrivals argued about who they should be bunking with. It was becoming clear that while most of them had been working on the docks, they were almost all pirates by trade, and some had only taken the job to give their crews an in with the local docks. The ladies worked in the building behind them, and they had run to the dock looking for a ride when things went wrong and the storm had already hit. The pirate crews had taken to sea, leaving only their land-bound allies to the ravages of the winds. So, they had ended up with this motley assortment, which apparently included a few shop clerks, though Dominic couldn't tell which were which. Likely because they were also formerly pirates. Boys, get in here and set the table. We're civilized folk here, and I won't have you making an even bigger mess of the house. The cook called. Yes, ma'am. One of the men winked at Dominic conspiratorially. I'm a bit shocked she didn't kick us down to the basement to keep her floors clean. Must be feeling a bit kindly toward us, given the chance of flooding. Dominic shook his head. No, I left a mess in the basement. Where do you think all the nobles and their mages went? Right then. Well, can't say that I haven't done worse. Mostly we put fallen crew members in the bottom hold when we scuttle a vessel after a battle. Same concept, I suppose. The cook brought out a whole tray full of dense bread rolls and a pot of stew, then made to serve Dominic and Amy with proper cutlery sets and placemats. No need to stand on formality today. It's already next to me. Just start filling bowls. I'm not that kind of stuffy duke. The cook gave him a genuine smile. I should have guessed as much. And might I say, you're a large step up from the house's former occupants. Chapter 527. What do they know? Dominic sat at the head of the table, slowly eating the hearty stew that the kitchen had made, while the other guests held an animated conversation about what life had been like before the Great Storm, as they were calling it. You know, I used to be a deckhand for Red Axe, the Orcish pirate. It was quite the life, but when he asked me to take over at the docks and get him a discount on the tariff fees, I was happy to be back on shore. In only 2 months, we had 3 encounters with naval fleets and 1 with the Blue Elves. By the time that we made it back to shore, it was a wonder that we had any crew left at all, and we'd lost half our cargo running from the elves. Their ships are ungodly fast, and if you don't distract them with a cargo dump, they'll just run you down and take it all by force. One of the men informed the group. A younger man nodded. The group that I work with had an arrangement with them for years, and then one of the captains thought that it would be more profitable to hide a few runs and not inform the rest of the fleet. Well, The elves caught him and insisted that we had all been reneging on our agreement to help them move goods. The retaliatory strikes took out 40 ships and over 1,000 sailors. What do you think the lords are going to do once the waters go back down? Do they even have enough soldiers left to enforce the travel restrictions? Dominic tapped the table to get their attention. What is this about travel restrictions? Oh, after the previous king died, the northern nobles put travel restrictions on the commoners. They weren't allowed to travel more than 10 kilometers from home, on pain of death. Even the traders had to start using the pirate ports if they didn't have a nobleman on board to vouch for them. Most of them did, but after whatever happened in Schiphol, we stopped getting trade vessels entirely. So, I suppose that part doesn't really matter. That made things a bit rough, I'm telling you. No matter how much we offered, they simply wouldn't come to us. Dominic nodded. How much do you know about the overall situation? The sailors shrugged. We all know what the pirates say, but until the storm, all the radios in the area were jammed to prevent Signia airships from pinpointing military movements. Dominic sighed, and Amy shook her head. You should likely know that, by international consensus, the war ended months ago. There is a new king on the throne in Albrols, and Prince Kaizan and his allies went rogue and staged a failed coup attempt that turned into a civil war when they refused to surrender. They launched monster attacks on southern Dagos, Signia, and even Schiphol for not supporting them, and eventually managed to even get a tower full of necromancers from Shersdonia on their side. So, you're saying that our lords, the ones who won't let us move away from home, due to the threat of Signia attacks, aren't at war with Signia at all? They think that they are. But everyone else agrees that they've already lost, and they're just in rebellion against their rightful king and every nation allied with Dagos. So, if they're caught, they'll be executed as traitors and war criminals for their attacks on civilians. So, for the last 2 months, we've been confined to our hometowns with no supplies, because we didn't know that our lords had rebelled against their oaths to the crown and were being hunted as criminals. More or less. The sailor sighed. Well, that changes a lot of things. Tell me, what do you know about the new king? It's the old lord of Boscombe. Early middle years. A lot more worldly than his predecessor. For one, he has required that servants be paid more than food and clothing at all estates. That's a start. But he also did not particularly want the role. He just couldn't accept Prince Kaizan having it, given his history. There was a lot of talk about what would happen after the battle with Signia. Many expected to get concessions that would have given us fertile land and dropped the price of food. That clearly never happened. But what is your view of what happened in the war? Dominic sighed. What we found when we counterattacked into Dagos was sad and pathetic. Half the nation is abandoned, as everyone either fled or starved to death. The entire place was in a drought that had lasted a decade, until last week when the storm hit. So now, the whole place is soggy, and still nothing will grow. The army wasn't equipped to deal with Magitech, despite their advancements that led them to field airships early in the fight. So, when Signia fought back, they lost tens of thousands of conscripts until mass desertion became the norm. The cities of Stantia province stood down without a fight. The commoners turned their lords over to the invading armies, and the land was ceded to Signia during the peace treaty after the official war was over. See, we were told that Signia occupied it, but we were told that they had brutally slaughtered everyone, and the cities were graveyards. That was the official news we got before the radios were all jammed. And the pirates wouldn't know what was going on along the eastern coast, as they don't trade from Signia to Dagos, so they hadn't talked to anyone who knew the truth. No, the cities of Stantia province are fine. The drought never really hit them as hard as it did most of Dagos, and they were the major supplier of food to the nation, until Signia demanded the province as reparations. Now, there are Signia lords and laws in place, and the city populations are higher than they were before the war, as everyone is pretending that the refugees from Dagos are locals so that the loyalists hiding in the cities don't come for them. Chapter 5:28. Set a barrier. The windows rattled, then the walls of the manor as the wind increased, and Amy rushed upstairs to get a better view of what was going on outside. The rattling of the house muted, but she looked pale when she came downstairs. Things are getting bad out there. I count at least 30 active cyclones, Winds hitting the house are pushing 200 kilometers an hour, and waves are regularly reaching 4 meters. They're cresting over the wall, but it's mostly vertical energy, so not too much is getting into the yard. We can hold for now, but the weather is too bad for us to go out and reinforce the barricades again. I don't know how long this is going to last, but I put the barrier over the whole compound to let the waves roll back out. I'll need your help to keep it maintained. Dominic nodded in acceptance. That's not an issue. I'm quite good at keeping barriers going. Simple storm winds aren't an issue. I'm more interested in what is causing this. There are theories that the breaking of the curse that was placed on Dagos after they invaded Wavemates is the cause, but this new storm doesn't seem to track with everything else. It's like the effect is escalating and not passing. One of the ladies from the brothel laughed, a slightly hysterical tone that put everyone's nerves on edge. Aren't any of you followers of the Maudlian faith? Dominic shrugged. Wavemates follows the dragon gods, drowned in a holy baptism, cleansed with flaying wind, and then purgatory fire. The 3 stages of divine retribution to purify souls for reincarnation. I think that Dagos has angered the gods of humanity, not the dragon gods. And now it is being punished. Dominic shrugged. I'm not an expert in that. But the storm would also be in line with a large area curse breaking. The drought was as well, now that I think of it. So, it might actually be less drastic than it seems while sitting in it. There are bound to be some aftershocks of a decade-long spell ending for whatever reason it chose now to end. I mean, it could have only had enough energy for a decade. Or it could be ending because so many of the Dagos nobles and royals are dead. One of the older men chuckled. And exactly how many of them did you kill, Prince Dominic Wavemates, Butcher of Westover? Dominic winked at him. A little over 10,000 in total. One of the women snapped her fingers. Wait, I knew that I knew you from somewhere. I used to live in Sebing and Axbridge, and you used to bring desert monster corpses into town to sell. Everyone had theories about where your hut was, and more than once they made plans to take it to the Baron, so he could collect you for the bounty. But nobody ever did, in case you held a grudge against the town. Amy laughed. Oh, that is rich. The Baron wouldn't have done anything. They were under orders not to lead a posse against him, especially in the early days after the war, when they didn't realize that he was just a kid. Everyone thought that the Butcher was a full-grown Dragonkin mage, and going by the destruction, they assumed he was close to level 70. It would be suicide to lead a posse after that. The maids looked toward the basement door. Did age have anything to do with the situation? Given what he was capable of, they didn't think it would have mattered if he were 10 years younger. How did you get to that high of a level at your age, anyhow? I mean, you have to be older than you look, but still. One of the men asked. There are unique advantages to being a Dragonkin. We grow powerfully magical, very fast with a bit of practice. Amy here is still more powerful than I am in pure spell level, but I have endurance on my side. That said, he began to channel outside mana into the barrier, taking the strain off Amy. The wind still buffeted the house and rattled the windows, but not at an extreme level, though Dominic could feel the strain on the barrier as it dampened the worst of the winds and absorbed the waves that crashed over the walls. Putting the house on a hill inside the walls was both a blessing and a curse. They weren't underwater, but the house was in the wind, and in an age of rifles and artillery, the house was almost entirely exposed to bombardment. Even with cannon fire, it was a poor design, but this manor was an extremely old one, a historical manor, showcasing the long lineage of the former occupants. Amy relaxed a little with Dominic taking on the strain of feeding the barrier, but returned to the top floor to check their surroundings. There were far too many tornadoes building around the manor, and the storm only seemed to be growing as the afternoon faded. Soon, it would be nothing but lightning to mark the approach of the deadly winds, and they would need a watcher on both sides of the house. However, they couldn't afford to keep the shutters open long, as even with the barriers, the house would lose heat fast through its ancient single-pane windows. This manor might look opulent, but like the nobility of Dagos, its splendor had long since faded, leaving nothing but a husk of its former glory. Well, that wouldn't matter much longer, as this was likely to be the only surviving house for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. Forget faded glory, it would be a relic of a lost civilization at this point. a memorial to a nation better forgotten. However, there was still one task left for them to do before they could call this war over. Someone needed to find Prince Kaizan and his inner circle and eliminate them before they could come up with a new plan to attack Signia. One that might be worse than what he had tried before. Chapter 5:29 Critical Mass. Dominic sipped cheap wine from the cellar as the storm shook the house. It had grown so intense that even with an area barrier over the compound, the amount that he was reducing the storm's force by was no longer enough to make it comfortable in the yard. He could make it stronger, but if he made it a solid barrier, the mana use would be more than he could maintain. It wasn't like being in combat, where he could refresh himself with Arcane Blast constantly. But at least he could use external mana, and not just internal mana to keep the barrier up. If he was limited like a normal mage, it would have fallen by now. Amy, what does the radio say?
He called.
Nothing. There hasn't been a broadcast in nearly an hour now. I think that we might be the last survivors in the area. But I'm more concerned about the storm itself. I can feel mana building in the core, and I count at least 50 cyclones that would rate a force 3 or higher. Sustained winds are already in excess of 200 kilometers an hour, and the cyclones are forming into huge water funnels even with that much linear wind. For all I know, they could be maxing out the ratings. We're lucky that we haven't taken a direct hit yet, but we've had to come within a kilometer of us so far, and the storm now extends to the horizon in every direction, including out over the ocean. This is not a natural storm, and when that mana builds to critical mass, something terrible is going to happen. Dominic frowned. Do you think that we should move? Amy laughed. I can't even open a small portal home to warn them with the interference. We're not going anywhere. But where did you have in mind? Modberry. Maybe Bamberbury? Amy waited silently for him to explain why he wanted to go to the most populated region of Dagos. Then it came to her. The storm had formed directly overhead. Dominic was wagering that it would follow him, and he could bring 300 kilometers an hour winds to a region with a population in the millions and wooden framed houses. It was a brilliant tactic. Why fight the enemy when you could simply obliterate them with a natural disaster? With the northern peninsula annihilated, that was the last region with significant rebel forces loyal to the prince. Perhaps they would even get lucky and get Prince Kaizan himself? Nobody had seen him for at least a month that they knew of, but he had to be hiding somewhere. She was still wondering if there was a way that she could make Dominic's dreams a reality when she felt a twist of magic from the basement. Someone was activating a ritual spell down there. Dominic, I feel it. I'm headed down to see what it is. The sailors backed away when they saw that Dominic had a mortar in one hand and a pistol in the other. Only one of those two things was suitable for indoor use, especially when they were in the house. Carefully, Dominic made his way down from the kitchen entrance, so he didn't have to break a barricaded door to get into the main room. The bodies were gone from the basement, disposed of by Amy, though there was still blood everywhere. However, that was true before he had arrived as well. The ritual circle was drawn in blood, as was necessary for so many necromantic rituals. The runes were glowing, and the amount of magic in the air told him that something huge was about to happen. However, there was nobody in the room. Not even that odd feeling of being watched that came with scrying spells or hidden threats. Then, a blast of magic knocked Dominic to the ground, and everything went silent around them. He put the mortar away and took out a second pistol, expecting the arrival of more mages, but found nothing. There was bright light streaming in the basement window, the blood circle was dried and inert, and there was no sign of the storm raging outside. He needed to check on the others. Dominic silently raced upstairs, where he found everyone unconscious, but breathing. Amy came to the top of the stairs and silently waved him up. She led him to the radio room and threw open the storm shutters. The storm was gone, but so was everything else. They were sitting in a wooded area that smelled faintly of marshland, inside an intact house. An intact house with no yard, no driveway, and no sign of how it had gotten here. Don't give me that look. I know a lot of magic, but move this house out of the storm isn't one of the spells I am familiar with. Amy complained. Do you think that we will have guests soon? The basement runes were glowing, so it should have been a planned escape. Perhaps not exactly how they planned it with the spellcasters dead, but planned. Which means we're likely still in Dagos. Amy smiled. Oh, I certainly hope so. There was a reason that they were friends. Now, someone had to wake up the others and tell them what was going on. We've got movement in the woods, Amy whispered. Dominic lay flat on the floor and slid forward to look out from between the stone pillars of the balcony railing with his pistol at the ready. Amy hid behind the curtains, peeking through periodically to whisper updates that a normal human would not hear. They looked confused. Dagos hunters. Noble badging, commoner clothing, bows and arrows. She whispered, perhaps we should say hello? They might know where we are. Or they might be bait to lure us out. They smiled at each other, both knowing that if these hunters were bait, it would be a slaughter. Unless Kaizan had another mage sect on his side, there wasn't much that would stop the pair of them on a rampage. Chapter 530, Rehomed. Dominic stood up on the balcony and holstered the pistol from his right hand, while keeping the other low, hidden by the railing. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Might you be so kind as to tell us where we are? The group raised their bows with trembling knees. Are you a ghost? Of course not. But that's what a ghost would say as well, isn't it? Why don't you start with where we are? 10 kilometers west of Southford. One of the men answered carefully. Oh, right on the Axbridge border then. That makes sense. This was the furthest extent of the first storm, the furthest western town in Dagos. If they had been relocated by the storm, they had been hurled to the furthest extent of the phenomenon. The man nodded, and Dominic continued. Who is in charge here? The hunter shrugged. Who the hell even knows these days? The Necromancer King sent a whole regiment of undead to provide aid after the storm, but they killed all the nobles and the town guards. So, I guess that you could say that they're in charge here now. The Necromancer King of Shersdonia? Why would he send a rescue troop of any sort? The hunter threw up his hands in frustration. How in the seven hells should I know? They just showed up through portals with food and then started killing everyone with noble blood and turning them into spectral knights. All right. I take it that they're all in town now. The hunter nodded. I wouldn't go there, though. It's creepy as all get out. We've got 2 whole families staying with each of us in our hunting shacks, so they don't have to stay in a town full of undead. Isn't Southford nearly 400,000 people? Most of the farmers have taken in people as well. The undead are staying in the noble district, but the unholy magic is creeping everyone out. Everyone who has connections outside the city has left until things are settled. Dominic sighed. Well, it looks like we're here now. I hope this spot wasn't claimed. The hunter gave him a faint smile. You're 10 kilometers from the city, in the middle of the forest. Other than the fact that you're sitting on top of my trapline, you won't see much of anyone so close to the border. It's not safe to be here. The Axbridge army patrols the area to make sure that there are no smugglers trying to bypass the checkpoints on the road to Tinning. Dominic thought hard and realized the issue. The road ran from Swazel in Skipple through Thedel in Axbridge to Southford in Dagos in only 3 days' travel for a caravan. Naturally, there would be customs and tax collectors stationed all over the region. How is the situation, other than the undead? Tinning is flooded. We're all right. Swazel has minor flooding, as they're right on the river. But Thedel should be all right. We've seen caravans from their direction since the wind ended this morning, and they're not carrying refugees. That's a good sign. We've got a whole bunch of sailors and dock workers in the house with us, along with some domestic ladies and evening friends of the free ports. The hunter gave a genuine smile this time. You know, I might actually like you, stranger. Never mind the horns. Anyone who travels in a relic of a barony manor with a bunch of pirates and whores can't be all bad. Behind him, Dominic heard Amy laughing. That was certainly one way of looking at things. However, it didn't tell them anything about how they had ended up here in the first place. The only thing that they could do was to either wait for someone else to arrive, or head to the city and talk to the foreign mages. Assuming that they were willing to talk, and not just fight, it wasn't clear whose team they were on at this point. There were mages from Shersdonia on the side of Prince Kaizan, but they weren't officially sanctioned by the king. Well, in that case, would you care to come in for tea? Perhaps some mulled wine? Call it a housewarming party, I suppose. The hunter's friends still looked nervous, but they made their way to the front of the house, and Dominic went down to meet them as Amy woke the others. They were groggy from the magic, but they weren't injured, and they were overjoyed to hear that the storm wasn't affecting the area and that they weren't dead. That was the outcome they had all expected when things started going wrong. Their first thought was that the barrier had failed when a tornado hit them, and that it was all over. Amy still had some concerns that it might happen again, but they were so near two other nations that there was at least some chance that the magic wouldn't follow them. When the hunters came in and saw familiar faces, Dago's faces, they were much more relaxed than seeing Dominic, who was clearly not human. Then they saw Amy, who appeared to be a teen girl, an underage mage, by the way that she was dressed, and out of place among the rough and rowdy crowd in the house, or even the domestic servants that should belong to a Dago's noble. Welcome. I believe that there is still some stew and bread to go with the tea. Just give us a moment to boil some water. We weren't expecting to be relocated to somewhere that could get guests. Dominic explained. Somewhere that
Can get guests.
the hunter asked, scratching at his scruffy beard. We were in Lightson, and there is a major storm going on there, multiple tornadoes at the highest power levels we have rankings for. Everything is destroyed, either by floods or winds. We were protecting the house with magic, and then something happened, and here we are, just as confused as you are about how we got here. The cook nodded in confirmation. Thankful, though. Nearly anywhere is better than where we were.